Good morning. My name is Maia Miguel, Senior Executive Director for Foundation Relations and Founding Executive Director for FIU Foundation's Office of Inclusive Philanthropy. I am so pleased that you all have joined us this morning for one of many diversity, equity, and inclusion roundtables that we will be hosting throughout the year. The FIU Foundation Office of Inclusive Philanthropy is pleased to host today's roundtable in collaboration with FIU's Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the Center for the Humanities and Urban Environment. In honor of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, this virtual roundtable is designed specifically for our South Florida and FIU communities with a focus on how AAPI individuals have contributed to the history and culture of Miami and elsewhere. We will also explore the model minority myth, the Black versus Asian conflict, and discuss the ongoing violence against the AAPI community, and examine our role as an institution of higher education in addressing anti-AAPI racism in the context of our commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Joining us for our roundtable discussion this morning is Dr. Joanne Lee, Dr. Mitzi Carter, Emily Gresham, Joshua Ho, and our moderator, Dr. Philip Carter. While we are so sad to see her leave, we are so proud of Dr. Joanne Lee, who has been confirmed in an historic appointment as the 16th Chancellor of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. She will be the first woman of color to serve as UNO Chancellor and the first Asian American in the history of the University of Nebraska system to hold an executive leadership role. Dr. Mitzi Carter is a cultural anthropologist and an instructor of anthropology, East Asian Studies, and the African and African Diaspora Program in the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. Emily Gresham is Assistant Vice President for Research, Innovation, and Economic Development and co-founder of Startup FIU, which is a platform designed to solve the community's most pressing challenges through innovation and entrepreneurship. Joshua Ho is a proud FIU alumnus and program director for Miami-Dade County's Asian American Advisory Board. Established in 1997, the Asian American Advisory Board was created to work in an advisory capacity to the Board of County Commissioners, administration, community, and all agencies in Miami-Dade County with respect to matters pertaining to the Asian American community. In addition, the board and its staff routinely assist people with their grievances and intervene with the appropriate parties to seek a resolution to issues the community faces. Our moderator, Dr. Philip Carter, is an assistant professor, a sociolinguist and scholar of language and culture and immigrant and ethno-linguistic minority communities. He is also the director of the Center for the Humanities and Urban Environment. Philip?
Thank you, Maia. I want to start by thanking the guests, the panelists who are with us today, thanking the viewers. I see that we have about 60 people, excuse me, logged on to this. I also want to thank our amazing colleagues in the foundation, in addition to Maia, Carolyn Jackson, and in the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Emmanuel Bowles, and our amazing Vice Provost for DEI, E.K. Hudson. All of us got together to put this event on. And I want to tell you a little bit about how it all started. About a month ago, we hosted a teach-in in the center, in the Humanities Center, called I'm Not a Virus, a teach-in on anti-Asian, Asian American violence, for which we had Mitzi Carter and President-elect Lee, amongst other guests, including Margaret Cho. We had about 800 people tune in to watch that event, and at the end of it, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of questions that remained unanswered because we ran out of time. There was literally so much interest and so much energy around these topics that Maia and Emmanuel and Carolyn came to me and said, you know what, I think we really need to continue this conversation, and we feel that there may be some gaps in understanding at FIU and in South Florida around AAPI identity formation. So let's do a roundtable. and that's why we're here. So thank you for joining us. I'm really happy to be here on behalf of the Center for Humanities in an Urban Environment. And I want to dive in. We have a lot to talk about and not that much time. I want to start with, for the whole panel, I'm immediately going off script. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to just meditate on those terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion. In our practice session, we talked about equity and inclusion. And we had some really interesting conversation, I think, led by President-elect Lee, but all of us, I think, could talk about this, around the difference between equity and inclusion. What does it mean for AAPIs to be included? And what does it mean to be treated equitably in the context of higher education or more broadly?
So I guess we're just going to talk like friends.
Yep, we're talking
like a fireside chat. So I would kick off, and I see all my friends and colleagues here on the panel. I'm so excited to continue this conversation. I think sometimes when we talk about the word inclusion, let's just be politically incorrect, right? Before this whole focus on Asian Pacific Islander, when we talk about DEI, most of the time, people don't really think about Asians. And I think last time when Margaret was here and she talked about the model minority, I actually agree with her. I don't need to be a model. I am just one of you. So I think the word inclusion is particularly meaningful for us to discuss today. So I'm going to shut and probably ask some of my colleagues to continue this discussion about inclusion.
Deanie, I'm going to jump in. When I do my work, we see a lot of events hosted by the different communities. So I'm Korean American here. So when I go to Korean events, it's just Koreans there. And I realize that's the problem that we have. This is not what our community should be doing at this time. We want to open up so everyone can enjoy our culture, our heritage, our food, our language. And I think it falls on us to do that, but it's uncomfortable sometimes. But you know what? We have to step on that uncomfortable, that zone to say, you know what? If you want to be included, accept it as who we are, as Americans who happens to be Koreans, or as Americans who happens to be Asians, that we have to open to everyone to see us, not from someone else. If you want to say about Korean food, come and see me, Joshua. You know, you want to hear me talk about K-pop? I'm not the best at it, but come and see me and my son. K-drama, my wife. Talk to her about K-drama. And I think that's the part when I say inclusion. So when I always go out, I say, we are diverse. The richness of diversity is there. But the richness of inclusion have to be there as well, to say, you know what, this is the lining of our nation. Face it, this is who we are. This is our nation, and nothing's gonna change. But if you want to make it better, then you know we have to share. And I think that's what inclusion is about for me. So when I always say we are diverse, but if we keep saying diverse, then we just separate like this. But I think we have to be inclusive so we're together. And hopefully by doing this is inclusion, by having everybody here, but people are interested in us. But at the same time, what took you so long? You know, and I think that's what I want to share at this time.
Yeah, I think for me, inclusion and equity are along on the same, oops, am I muted? Okay, no. Sorry. I think inclusion is bringing people to the table to have these kinds of different, to really kind of shift up the culture of universities or organizations to help raise different scenarios and points of views to make sure that in the university setting, for example, that students felt seen and acknowledged, right? Because they can tell anecdotal stories in their classrooms, or the experiences that they bring to the classrooms are valued by others who can hear them with more nuanced ears, right? It's about saying, you know, hey, let's acknowledge that the land that we're on is occupied, you know, that it's the ancestral homelands of sovereign native nations, today the Seminole and Miccosukee. It's about acknowledging, it's inclusion is about doing things like this, like Joshua just mentioned, having these kinds of forums or teach-ins that Philip organized. I think for me, it's about really kind of generating more courses on campus that address Asian American diversity, Asian American histories in the curriculum, finding out how many Asian American students are on campus, right? How can we identify them? How can we support them better? And then equity is building on inclusion. So it's about looking at all of the structural issues and saying, okay, we have injustices, we have historical legacies and real boundaries that have been put into place, looking at the legacies of how white supremacy has really separated people in this country, and then looking at the institution itself and saying, how can we dismantle those things? Not just cover it up with more representation, but how do we give real power to people to shift the systems? So in a university setting, I think we scan the landscape and say, what are the various programs that are out there that target marginalized groups? Are they being supported? Are all of these programs and the directors being supported financially? Are they given good support to really truly thrive? Why or why not? So equity is about, it's about really making those tough moves and supporting professors who are doing really strong decolonial work, and providing resources to them, so they can really truly decolonize the curriculum. Is the university providing more money to Asian studies to build an Asian American studies component so that we can really, again, look at these institutional issues? Are we recruiting faculty members who are, bringing this top Asian scholarship? That's an equity move. And when it comes to the political field, I think Asian Americans have such little inclusion in Congress. So we especially need strong allies to help with equity issues. So, we need to say, we need inclusion on one hand to say, okay, the model minority myth is a myth, right? So there are places where Asians are some of the most impoverished groups in the country, like in New York City. There's a whole Chinatown, which is economically invulnerable, right? But because of the lack of inclusion, that remains invisible to the larger public. So we only see the crazy rich Asian types like Margaret Cho said in the teach-in a few months ago. But we tend to forget the vulnerable working women who are in parlors, right? And the migrant groups and the refugees, because we don't have folks to help make them more visible. So there's less equity and resources being diverted to those folks. So equity and inclusion then work hand in hand.
Mitzi, I think one of the terms that haunts equity and inclusion that remains unnamed, but is like embedded in both of them, is the notion of transformation. And I think that that's what you're talking about. Always when we have these conversations around equity and inclusion, we have to ask equity to what and inclusion into what and for whom, right? So is it the idea of taking the pre-existing structure and adding someone who has been excluded to that mix and like stirring and saying, okay, it's done? Or does it mean changing, does the inclusion and the proposition of equity somehow fundamentally change what the structure is in the first place? And it seems like what you're suggesting is that at the institutional level, that some transformation has to take place in order that equity be achieved.
So Philip and Missy and Joshua, and I want to talk about the two things that last time we chit chat on. We always feel like we're the foreigners, right? Which is kind of weird when people use the term foreigner on me. I live in this country much longer than I live in Hong Kong. And then I want to touch base on the second thing that Emily talked about last time in saying that, hey, how do we get to the leadership role? And then go back to what Missy talked about. The pipeline is where we should focus on, right? The equity and the inclusion. Forget about the leadership role. That will be a big vision we set on in this coming few years, but we got to develop a healthy pipeline. And I know one of the participants asked a question and asking us, hey, we tend to stay in our own comfort zone. We stay in our own community. I get it. I'll give you an example. I think a little bit easier for people to remember that, right? As an immediate outgoing president of the Council of Chinese American Deans and Presidents, certainly as a council, our goal is to advance our member into higher ed leadership role. But we always challenge ourselves this one question, like the participant was asking. We always want to stay in our comfort zone. Whoa, we're going to all bring all the Chinese, deans, provosts, and presidents together. But we must challenge ourselves in saying that We're doing exactly what we try to advance and not to do that. Just try to be more inclusive and a little bit more like, bringing everybody together. So we start to bring speakers. They're not Asians. They could be Caucasian, they could be Black, they could be any origin. And I think that is an act of by example, right? If you really want to advance inclusiveness and equity, you gotta at some point try to break free from that. And I always say that, I don't know, my colleagues may disagree with that. I said the day that we don't have to talk about inclusiveness and equity, we've done it. But this is not the day. So we have to actively pursue sending a signal, a credible signal to the market that we intend to be more inclusive. And in our own community, how can we do that to demonstrate we are going to live by what we preach? So I want to hear from my colleague what they think about this.
Well, yeah, Joan, you bring up a good point, because on the flip side of it too, there should be Asian representation on panels when it's not AAPI month, right? I mean, there's a double-edged sword there. This notion of representation versus inclusion, right? And to be truly inclusive, to be truly equitable means that we don't just have representation without the sort of freedom to express views from our own lenses. So I do think it works both ways. Like, to Joshua's point, to your point, when we are gathering, the Thai American, festivals and things like that, you want to be able to see other races there, because you're then just truly inclusive. They're truly getting to enjoy our culture. And then on the flip side, right, I want to be able to see Asian presidents, Asian deans, Asian leaders on panels when it's not Asian American month, right? Because I do think you're all scholars and leaders in your own right.
I want to jump in and a shout out to FIU's Asian Student Union. When I went there a few years back, and I expected, when you say ASU, FIU, all Asians, right? But when I went and attended the meeting, it wasn't so. The executive committee members were not even Asians. And I'm gonna be honest, my interns, first is the Venezuelan, second was a Cuban. And people look at them, why are you working for, or why are you interning at an Asian American Advisory Board? But I realized, when I promoted about our board to the students at ASU, the one that were interested over those. And I said, that's great. As long as you're passionate about who we are as a whole. And I'm gonna be honest, we are one community. I don't care what you look like, what your faith background is. We're one. And that's the way we need to keep moving forward. And I know that we have Aki asking, we're doing things right now with working with organizations, because our board is created because of equity, right? Equitable, right? We have the Black Affairs Advisory Board, Hispanic Affairs, Commission for Women, Domestic Violence, LGBTQ Advisory Board. We have Interfaith and Asian and Community Relations Board. And I'm gonna jump in and say what Dean Lee said is correct. People ask, what is the vision of your board? Personally, when we don't need a board. When we don't need a board, that's when my job is no longer needed, then we have made it. But right now, it's not so. And working with different organizations, we know that we need to be more civically engaged through education by working together, by growing our economic development, by working together, because Asians have problems with each Asians too, especially in the business front. So we need to work together, share information so that we can grow together. And third, we have to share our culture through cultural advancement by showing the beauty of once again, our background heritage. Maybe you're a second generation, third generation, but at the same time, because the way you look, you can't get away from it. And I was talking with Sharon Fan, our chairwoman, right? This morning, she said, you know what? As first generation, we were here to assimilate as quick as possible so we can survive and to succeed. But for my kids who were born in Hollywood, Florida, they're assimilated to what? They're Koreans because of the parents, but they're Americans. They've never been to Korea, not yet. So all they know is South Florida and wherever we travel in the US, driving around. So when you say, where are you from? This is it. Perpetual question, where are you from? They're gonna say, Hollywood, Florida, Miami-Dade, or Broward County. So when did that stop? At the same time, I think it's good to understand that we want to, since you are perceived different in a way, to kind of share as a teaching moment. I wasn't a professor, but I taught at the middle school for 14 years before this job. And I realized my students at North Miami Middle, when they saw Asian men, they go, Mr. Ho, where are you from? Are you from China? They go, no, give me another country. Japan? No, give me another country. They go, and they stop. Then I go, Korea, but South Korea. And I would tell them, I was a dean of discipline, but hopefully they love me more than they hated me. And I would tell them, if you care about me a little bit, if some other student asks me the same question, you would tell them, oh, he's Korean. And they did that. And so I'm very thankful for that opportunity. But at the same time, I think going back to is, I don't want to push on our agenda or our struggles to the next generation.
So Joshua, I think you brought up a great point. I want to jump on and interrupt you for that, right? You said that, hey, I don't care how you look. I don't know where you're from, but as long as you're passionate about this topic, let's talk. And I think that's a great line to start with any kind of conversation. I think last time we talked about it, like people always ask, where are you from? And I was like, I'm from here. Like, seriously, where are you from? And we talk about like, okay, what is your name? My name is Joanne. No, seriously, what is your real name? And I would say, that is really my real name. And this is kind of like a preconceived notion about Asian Americans. And it's really difficult to take away. I know Marlon asked a question. Well, so then share with us exactly how do we get intimate to understand Asian Americans? Let me start by saying what Joshua was talking about, right? Get to know me for who I am. Take away all the preconceived notion because each one of us is unique. Hey, I may like Asian foods and have a preference for Asian food, but I'm still very unique. But I will give you another example, right? However, in a general understanding, wherever I'm coming from, respect my heritage. For instance, if I go to India, right? If I go to travel in South India, I just learned from my friends what I think that I need to do. If I see an elderly, I will touch the elderly foot to show my respect. Why am I learning all this? Because that is a common human courtesy. You respect the culture, but yet let me get to know you. So what I'm asking, most of my friends that don't look Asians, right? I'm gonna ask you, get to know me for who I am. And don't ask me twice, seriously, what is your real name? My name is Joe, just say it as it is. But also at the same time, take interest in our heritage. Understand, in a very inquisitive mind, ask. So where you originally from, what are the common practices you do? Get a little curious about each other. And I think that is the part of being inclusive, right? Get to be a little bit curious about each other's, oh, what your grandfather, did, back in Hong Kong and that kind of thing. That will be a great civilized conversation to start with.
I think for the question by Marlon is, I think when I go to an event, I Google something beforehand just to make sure that what I do or say will not be offensive, even with the Asian communities too. So I think it's two ways. I think if you want the intimacy, I think you have to go halfway, meet halfway with others too. Don't expect that it's going to be 100% by the other side. And I think that's the best way to engage others is to take interest. By taking interest, you're going to study. Like for my wife, I know what kind of flowers she likes because I ask her or find out, beforehand, right? I think that's the same kind of approach that I would take in that question with Marlon. But I know him, so, and he does that too. So I think when we have these festivals that we have, and people that's coming out to sell or whatever, they coming out of the comfort zone too. And sometimes also is the way the country they're coming from make them kind of question about things about why people are being so nice to me, or the question about, can I trust my local government or the government itself? And I think that itself is also something that we have to take into consideration. Sometimes when I go to restaurants and I see they bring a bowl of rice at a restaurant and they put chopsticks like on it, right? And they bring it as a presentation, so nice. I will tell the manager that is very offensive to many of the Asian, in cultures. That means death. You don't do that. So they go, oh, I didn't know that. So I went to Ceviche 305, and they brought the rice with. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't do this. This is no good, because you may think this is so nice, but and afterwards I hope they don't, as I say, we don't do that anymore. Because for the Asians, especially in the Far East Asian, that is offensive. So I think that's the thing that we can do to include them in and share, not in an offensive way, but hey, with a smile, with the love, passions, and hey, that is offensive to many of the Asians. So when they come here, they're gonna say, hey, what's up with this? So
Joshua, I want to jump in, and Dean
Yes.
Lee, you were referencing a question. I'm not sure that our viewers know what the question was. Marlon was asking, what are your recommendations for building more intimate relationships with Asian American communities, families, and businesses? So for the viewers who couldn't see the question, that's the conversation that we've been having for the past couple of moments. Dean Lee, President-elect Lee, I want to cycle back real quick before we take the conversation in a separate direction. I think that you've really nailed a point that is misunderstood by a lot of people. A lot of folk who are not AAPIs don't understand, or who are not immigrants don't understand the interpretative force of being asked, where are you from and what's your real name? And so I want to clarify that for the viewers so that maybe we can turn the page on that. Could you cycle back to that and explain why for you that is a disagreeable, undesirable, problematic line of inquiry?
I think, thank you, Philip. I think that last time I shared a story that when I was going through my PhD time, and I have a lot of good friends, and I have this friend, he really meant well. He really was trying to look out for me. One day he pulled me aside, probably the third year of my PhD program. He was like, you know what? I can help you to change your last name, Lee, L-I, into something more American, because when you go out, get done with your PhD, you can find a job a little bit easier. You have a little bit more interviews. You have a little bit more. To me, I have to say, this is actually kind of like, I know he really meant well. He really tried to help, but it's kind of like offensive. I was like, wait a minute. I thought, getting interview, having opportunity is for what I can do, what I can achieve, right? Look into my potential, not because you have a preconceived notion of my last name. And the second thing is, I have to tell you, I think it was second year in college or so, I came over from Hong Kong, and with the last name Lee, I want to tell people they already assume, oh, you're from mainland China because it's spelled L-I. I was like, no, ask me. No, I'm from Hong Kong, because it's phonetic. And I remember going through a class, was kind of like American politics, that class or something. And my professor had a habit of going through the class and asking questions, every one of them. When it come to me, he skipped me every single time. And then he has a rule. At the end of the semester, if you ace all your exam through the semester, by the final, all you need to do, just show up and sign your name. So in order to make a point, I show up and sign my name and walk out with a shiny A. Now, why does it still mean something to me today and I have to bring it, to the audience? It's because, hey, it hurt. It really did. And then honestly, I'm a rock star A student, all right? But the fact is, even if I don't speak English well, give me that chance. I am in that class. Okay, at the time I was not American, but now I am. But I am an American student, right? I'm sitting in a classroom just like all the other kids. Give me that chance. Even if you have to suffer through my difficult accented English, it's okay. That is part of learning. So sometimes I think deep rooted in us, I don't think the professor was trying to be mean. He probably thinking he was trying to be considerate. That kid probably wouldn't understand the question or would not have any cultural reference or so, but give it to me. If I fail, give it to me. So that's what I'm asking all my friends. I don't care how you look like, just give it to us. Be inclusive. Take us as part of your family, because I'm taking you as part of my family.
Emily, I think that you were about to jump in.
Yeah, and Philip, I mean, I think to the part of what's your real name, where are you really from, right? I think that is just a perpetual reminder, this microaggression, that you don't belong here. And the name that you actually use all the time is somehow not real. And I think that that has, if it's not overtly offensive, right, it does put into your mind that you're not living some real life for some reason, right? For some reason, you're not American. For some reason, Emily is not your real name. Then they start, transforming it. Well, what was your given name, right? Okay, well, it's not where you're from, but where are your parents from? And it's like, we'll tell you eventually, kind of like what Dean Lee says, like, keep talking to us. Eventually it's going to come out. You don't got to know everything from day one. Right. And this notion of like, okay, so here's the last thing. If I say things like, I'm from Thailand, my first response is always, oh, I've been to Vietnam. And in the beginning, I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then later on, nowadays, now that I'm super not a minority, like model minority, I'm like, okay, so it's kind of like me saying, where are you from? And you guys are like, Texas. And I'm like, oh my God, I've been to Toronto, right? There's like no intersection of like similarity. So it's not, you're actually not trying to ingratiate yourself to me or relate to me when you tell me you've been to a completely separate country than from where I am from.
Yeah, Emily, I want to follow up on a couple of things that you've just said, because this touches on the perpetual foreigner issue that I think everybody has talked about so far. And that's why I wanted to press down on Dean Lee's, President-elect Lee's notion of naming and where are you from, and those types of questions is always being just a little bit of a reminder that you're not from here, that you're covering something up even. This is, what's your real name? Where are you really from? So it can be pernicious in that way also. But I also want to talk about, as a part of the always already outsider, where are you from, what's your real name discourse, I want to talk about the category AAPI itself and the way that the category consolidates so much difference. I mean, this is what you're talking about right now. I think, oh, my family's from Thailand. Oh, I've been to Vietnam. Okay, so it's the idea that there's such a, let's say, lack of understanding even about what Asia is. So we're taking Central Asia, South Asia, the Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and this tremendous array of difference in language, culture, history, politics, power, ethnicity, race, I mean, it goes on, and putting it into one category. Now, that's US racial formation, and that's what the category is, what the category has been produced as, and we're working with it. In fact, you see that we're using the term AAPI in this conversation. But I just want to ask you, Emily, how do you orient to that category? I mean, what's, for you personally, what does it mean to be interpolated or constructed as AAPI, and does that term fit you?
Yeah, no, so the term totally doesn't fit me because I had to Google it. Like when it first came out, I'm not even kidding. I know it's so embarrassing. Like I was sitting here, like, I always say, this notion of assimilation, right? I was born in Thailand, came here when I was 5. So we worked really hard to assimilate. And part of the problem with that was then I avoided all sort of Asian-based conversations, right? I avoided Asian studies, though I was very curious about American identity. So when I went to college, I actually studied African-American identity, right? So that's really where my sort of construct is rooted in terms of otherness. However, so when AAPI came out, I was like, I guess as an Asian, I better go figure out what that means. And I'm literally, y'all, like 2 months ago, I Googled it. So that's the problem, right? I'm like, why did we just come up with something new? And I guess, okay, fine. So we're trying to orient and we put everyone together. we're also forgetting our South Asians. South Asians are Indian, and that's a totally different culture, and they're not usually represented at all in AAPI conversations, right? And I'm like, whoa, you just took like 2/7 of the world's population and put it into one neat category, and it is extremely odd. And yet, cultural competence of being here, you assimilate, right? You're like, okay, cool, I'll use AAPI now. It's the new trend. It's trying to be inclusive, and what you try to do is name the fact that there are so many other cultures, and that you try to bring in your other brothers and sisters from other countries in Asia, and kind of saying, dude, this is like a huge swath of land you're trying to gather. And so you kind of have that conversation, but it is what it is.
Right, and 2 points follow. One is the consolidation happens because these categories are always constructed in relation to a default whiteness, that whiteness is considered the default, the thing that doesn't need to be marked or named. And so therefore you can have all of these categories swirling around it that consolidate all this massive difference, and it doesn't, that piece of the consolidation doesn't matter in effect because everything is always relating back to whiteness. And the second thing is, how do we as an institution unpack? I mean, we're working with the term because the term is useful in this moment, but we can't just stop with AAPI. We have to then, as an institution of higher education, unpack that term, right? And in order to do that, we do need Asian American studies, Asian studies, and that type of stuff on our campus and college campuses, indeed, wherever they are. Any other comments or follow-ups? Mitzi, I think you were poised to jump in on this.
Yeah, I think, it's a really political term. There was so much organizing work that went into creating this term. And it was so necessary because of all of the discrimination targeted at people who are visibly, hailed into that category. But it tends to also be very difficult for people who don't present visibly as, Asians like myself, right? In Miami, most people would look at me as Black. My mother is Okinawan, and my father is African American, and for me, using the term AAPI was a very sloppy kind of term. I didn't know how to fall into it, and it's I think it was only until I went to the West Coast where I felt more inclusive, included in that term in different ways. So I think it really points to the way that identity is so delicate, it's so fluid, but how terms have a power to organize. If we use it strategically, it can be really radical when we really learn and are conscious of how and why they were built in the first place. And still constantly being aware of how do we include people, like me, how do we include South Asians? How do we include other people who are still, are being targeted for all kinds of hate crimes in different ways than other Asian folks. And so there's a lot of labor that goes into kind of really unpacking what this term means and using it in a really kind of strategic way. I think what tends to get left out when we talk about this term in this kind of macro way is looking at, again, some of the ways that Asian women have been hypersexualized, and how that connects to a whole colonial history, right? And so we have to constantly be like looking at the history of it, why it was created, how we continue to use it, what gets excluded, and then really it's not a stable term, right? It's constantly going to be changing, and we have to be really conscious of those changes and reflect, the new generations that come. And maybe they want to change the term to something different. I know that a lot of Pacific Islanders feel uncomfortable with the term themselves, right? And so that's something that we're constantly, we can't just say, okay, this is a term that we're all going to use equally, right? It'll shift. It might shift, in a couple of years, and we'll have to Google another term. So yeah, I think that we have to leave ourselves that wiggle room, and constantly be interrogating these kinds of categories.
I'm going to jump in, Philip. I think before AAPI, we were part of the multicultural group, remember? That everyone, if you're not white, then you're part of the multicultural. And I think we kind of made it a little bit smaller. Like our board represents the continent of Asia. So when you said from Far East to Southeast to Middle East, including Turkey as well. And out of the 48 nations and states that we have approximately 11 nations and states representing on our board, including Iran, including Pakistan, India. We have from Caribbeans who are Asians too, Chinese Jamaicans. We have Chinese Cubans. We have one of our board members, 1/8 Chinese and 7/8 of others. And it shows how we hit. This is the current situation that we have, that we are really intertwined with globally. And I think it may be uncomfortable to say AAPI, but at the same time, the Asian Americans for me means the continent. And I think Mitzi said it before too. Some of it starts from our education system, from elementary and middle school and high school, how there was a lack of, like I studied AP, I was in AP classes, right? But when it came to the Asian history, it was all about the war, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, the Middle East War, and that was it. They didn't spend time to go into a little bit deeper, just to introduce a little bit more. Then we learn about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Then we learn about internment camps a little bit. But it was touched upon. Then we left for the next one. Maybe it's not enough time within the year to spend time on it, but I think there's a relevance to it. And I think Missy said it before. I think FIU can help to drive that, to bring it down to higher education, to high school, to middle school, to elementary school as well.
Mitzi, I want to toss it back to you there, because I know that I saw you react when he talked about when Joshua talked about the emphasis on war in public education. And I know that you write about militarization and thinking about that as part of the racial formation around AAPIs in the US. So I just wanted to give you a chance to follow up.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joshua. I mean, when I teach Asian studies at FIU, and I always ask the students what they know about Asia broadly, and it's always surrounding war, And I'm like, wow, we can really go into a lot more here in this class, and so we unpack, like we look at all kinds of other events about how racial formation has taken place. Like we look at court cases from the 1900s, the Ozawa case of like how people were defined as unassimilable, and how they go from being unassimilable to all of a sudden the model minority back to unassimilable, right? And how we look at that kind of fluidity of like, why is that? And then you can go back to the wars, right? But you can look at it in a more dynamic, nuanced way, and look at how, again, the idea of race is formed abroad, from Marco Polo and the narratives he brought back about, voracious prostitution and Asian, and then how this idea of women and sexuality get linked from that period on to the military diaspora of people being, having all of these rest and recreation spots all over the world, and how this image of women as Asian women as being prostitutes kind of comes back to the United States through Hollywood and plays, and how that narrative just sticks, right? And so we can do different talks about warscapes, right? But in a more nuanced way than just saying, okay, this happened, in World War I, and then this happened in Vietnam, and then the bombing happened, and then, that's so stale, and it's such a disservice to our students, because then you can connect. If you do this more nuanced education, you can really, again, look at the ways that formation takes place. You can look at the connections between Black Power movement and Asian and the Yellow Power movement, and how they learned from each other, how they strategized together. That's really important. You can look at how people's experiences overlap in different cities and different places. The constructions of Chinatowns connect that to, the kind of the landscapes of redlining, right? And across the United States, it's important to make those connections. If you keep separating them, we just start to really make these very separate categories stick and stay separate. And so that again, that kind of education is really important. You have to be creative. One of the exercises, for example, I do in my class, in my Asian studies classes, we do a study abroad exercise, but they go back in time into the nation when in China, Korea, and Japan, they were becoming modern nation states. And so they have to create a study abroad program going back in time, bringing FIU students back to those periods. And it's so interesting because I give them guides and I said, what would it be like for a Black student to go back in this period? And they, okay. And so they have to think and they have to do research, like, what is it like for my own racial formation coming into this space? And it's really funny because it's the first time they can think about it in those terms. So again, it takes you away from that, very stale, those learning objectives where it just focuses on, events around war without like really looking at processes, right?
Thank you, Mitzi. I want to jump back to something that Emily was talking, well, really the whole panel's talked about it. I think Emily was the last person to speak about AAPI as a nomenclature issue and how people situate themselves via nomenclature. Mitzi, you made a beautiful point about the way that the nomenclature and the terms that we use to name categories is always going to be in flux because the categories themselves are always going to shift because the categories are embedded in the conditions and the conditions are always historical, right? So there's never an endpoint. There's never going to be a moment in which it's satisfied. Except you'll note that we settled on the term white, and that's okay. But all the other terms are constantly in movement because the situation is always constantly happening. The negotiation and the dialectic with whiteness is always in flux and always at play. I want to, Emily, Mitzi, and others, I want to introduce a question from France Williams, who says, can the panelists expand on the connection between identity markers of AAPI and BIPOC? Does the masking and erasure of cultural markers perpetuate systematic inequality? And Emily, I'll just start with you. You said that that AAPI was not something that you oriented to originally. You Googled it. What about BIPOC, or what about other terms that are in circulation now, including in our DEI environment? How do you orient to those?
So same, had to look up BIPOC. But someone did, one of my best friends growing up, she would represent, and she studies African American Lit. Now she used to study Asian American Lit. And so part of the people of color origin, right? It goes back to this notion too, though, that we're always an other. Everything is defined from a white supremacist standpoint. And I think and Mitzi can correct me if I'm wrong, and everyone else can, but again, not being a scholar in this area, I can only go off of human experience. And in this human experience, I'm wondering, are these nomenclature namings of AAPI, BIPOC, is this sort of our way of saying, we're going to name ourselves, right? We're not just going to be Asian American. We're not just going to be African American. We're not just going to be Caribbean American. We're just going to name ourselves. And this is where the sort of maybe the fluctuations of the nomenclature comes from. But, certainly coming to the States and changing my name to Emily, I remember vividly sort of how empowering it was when it came onto my passport. Because prior to it coming onto my passport, I would always have to raise my hand in class and say, could you please call me Emily? And so I think that this notion of being able to name yourself is actually quite powerful. So from the perspective of if it's sort of our way to sort of start naming who we are, I can dig it, right? I can get around it. And I think that power of identity based on nomenclature, it's nuanced, but you can also own it, right? Once you understand, to Mitzi's point, understand the origins. Where did it come from? How do we organize around it? And once you start understanding where it comes from, then all of a sudden, you don't feel othered because you realize, oh, I must have named myself. Okay, Bab, right? Like, okay, cool. Like, let's build on that. And I love that sort of freedom to do that. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think that, no, that's really useful, Marie. Thank you. And I have to say, it reminds me of a little bit of the conversation in LGBTQ plus communities around pronouns, right? That yes, here are my pronouns. Here's how I present. Please just take my pronouns as I present them. And that resonates to me a little bit with what President-elect Lee was saying before. This is my name. Here's my name. Here it is. You know, no further questioning needed, except me for what I present, what I'm projecting. And so there's an interesting through line around a lot of these rights movements that I think is interesting to tie together. And that leads me to the next topic of conversation, which is the relationship between AAPI rights movements, advocacy groups, and other civil rights organizations, namely Black Lives Matter. Headlines after the alarming rise in violence against AAPIs suggested and even blamed that African Americans were largely to blame for many of the attacks, which we know is problematic. And I just want to open up the conversation now to the panelists to talk about coalition building, to talk about relationships between Black Lives Matter and AAPIs. Dean Lee?
So thank you, Philip. First, I would say that I personally prefer the term that Joshua used, multicultural. And then I want to observe what Mitzi talked about. Let's continue to interrogate those terms that we're using. Sometimes I think maybe for scholastic writing, easy reporting, we created terminology like AAPI or so. And I'm not blaming anyone for doing that. But like what Emily said, let me call my name for you, right? Give me that respect. And it's just convenient for people to just write API. And I want to know, I want to say to many of our friends here listening on, getting to know someone is not an act of convenience. Getting to know someone is intentional. It's someone that to show your care and attention to an individual. So don't label me just because it's convenient for you, right? Listen to me carefully because I will listen to you carefully too. And I think last time we chit-chat about the attacks on Asians, and I have to tell you, when it first started, I was like, okay, well, there's some news and they talk about it. I read the newspaper. It really, really saddened me. And I don't care whether you're Black, white, Asian, or whatever. When you attack an individual, you're a criminal, right? But as this whole thing keeps going on and spiraled down, and I really started to worry about my daughter, right? She walked out, she's Asian, right? You can tell she's Asian. And that is not a country I signed up for. I don't come here of that. I come here because I really believe this country has so many things to offer. And that is, I think, one of the big themes about today's conversation is to really emphasize on the multiculturalism, emphasize on our care for each other as a community. And whether it's Black Lives Matters or any kind of interest group, just continue to remind ourselves this is a community. We should be ashamed to allow that kind of thing to happen. And each one of you, it doesn't matter how you look, we have a responsibility to straighten this. This is bad. What kind of signal we're sending out to our younger generations? This is intolerable. Great that people now start to focus on, Asian American, but think about like people take advantage of elderly in nursing home. I'm just going to pull another example, right? It's just a human being, a decent human being will not allow that kind of things to happen, but it's just end up to be the topic of the day. So let's wise up and focus it heads on and solve it together. And I'm proud a lot of community have spoken up to help us, but don't help in the reason because we're Asian American. Help because we are really one of you.
Yes.
That's all I'm asking for.
And I want to build on that in terms of understanding, again, the origins, right? The origins, and to Mitzi's point, it was Asians couldn't assimilate, then they were super assimilated, and now we can't assimilate again. And it's just based on the geopolitical nature of where we are today in America, right? Today we are the flu bringers, or the stealer of tech, and then the you have the double agent thing with all of a lot of our Chinese and Asian faculty members. It's just convenient. So going back to this pitting the Asian American population against African American population is honestly Asians being used as a prop to further subjugate African Americans. It's like, oh, hey, look, they're a minority and they're different, and they've closed the wealth gap or the income gap, and it's like, yeah, because y'all gave us jobs, right? Like Asians we're definitely discriminated against, but certainly in a different way, and and there's a legacy of just slavery, it just dehumanization that occurred in the African American community that didn't occur necessarily in the Asian American community in this country. And so understanding that, I don't want to be used as a prop, certainly not against fellow humans. And I think that really beginning to understand where that sort of divide came from, and people are just reacting to fear and to sort of the ignorance that's out there, and who is it perpetuating, who is it benefiting, and really and kind of again just getting more knowledgeable about this stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a friend. Who was in Japan, and he's Black and Japanese, and he, like me, and he went for a job interview, and the person who was hiring is actually a white American, and he said, oh, your resume is great, but Japanese people don't like Black folks, so I don't think you would be a good fit here in this company. And then when he got past this guy, they were like, you're great, and he speaks perfect Japanese. And so it's when it gets to that question of who does this benefit, it's like that kind of, you're pitting people against each other unnecessarily. It reminds me also of the LA riots, right? When all of a sudden we're focused on this police brutality, and then zoom, let's look at the tensions between and the Black community and the Korean store market, store owners, right? And it's like, wait, weren't we talking about that? And so it's this kind of the shift of like looking at the real issue of police brutality, and now let's turn around and look at this issue now. And so it's a very dangerous thing to do. Yes, there are issues that are being addressed. There's a lot of solidarity movements that are happening, but the media and the social media circles are not focused on those things, right? Those are really erased and kind of made rendered invisible. But there are issues with for the general population with anti-Asian sentiment, right? Just by fact of living in this country, you're going to exhibit some anti-Blackness. You're going to exhibit but that's because of the system that we're raised in. You have to be conscious of those things. It's not just Black people who are doing that, but so we have to be really cautious. And I know this came up in the teach-in. We have to be super cautious of going, it's them, right? and looking at how do we build ourselves as a nation state, right? And to really dismantle the white supremacy and the kind of the vulnerabilities in so many communities, how groups become marginalized, how do we lift us all up? And while at the same time addressing those real institutional structural issues that keep some people really down. And the only way you can do that, again, is through that kind of really changing entire structures of curriculum, of systems, of neighborhood structures. And going back to Marlon's point, which I thought was really great, was like, he's asking, how do we do this then? How do I, as a person, as an individual, go out and actually, meet people like Joshua, who's saying, yes, meet me, talk to me, right? How do you do that? I mean, you go to the Thai temple, they have great events. If you want to stay at that cultural level, right? You can go and meet people, but then do more than that, right? It's constantly feel discomforted, right? Be ready to just embrace that kind of discomfort and go out and say, you know, I'm gonna be at your meetings. Is it okay if I sit in and just listen, right? And that's a pain for a lot of people because the traffic in Miami is a pain in the butt, right? And you don't want to be driving across town all the time, but it's important. I say that to my white students who ask me, I don't know any Black people. How do I meet Black people? I say the same thing, you know, don't enroll your children in your neighborhood Girl Scouts. You know, it's going to be all white. We live in segregated communities. Go across town. It's a pain. So just, you know, embrace discomfort. And this is the kind of way that solidarity happens, where we stop doing this blame game. And when we get to know each other's personal stories, personal experiences, so they don't seem outrageous when we see them on the news. And they're like, did that really happen? Are people really getting attacked? Like, you can ask any Asian person, they hear stories. I have friends my friend Mia, who was on the teach-in, she's Korean and Black. And sometimes she presents more to other people as very Korean. And she had like people spewing out things to her, saying, go back to China. She's like, what? You know, so this is the kind of thing we have to really, you know, I think, know each other's stories in a very intimate way, and then build on it through educating ourselves, so that again, that kind of blame, that displaced blame doesn't keep happening.
I'm gonna jump in, Philip, here for Mitzi. You know, this second time meeting y'all, but Mitzi, like, I was thinking of the Rodney King incident as well just now. I was gonna say that when you mentioned, so somehow we understand here. Some are suppressed, that we don't want to say it, but now is a time to open up and share our views, and some of the concerns or some of the things that we went through or going through together. My father was a pastor. After Rodney King happened, he got together with other churches, and with the Black churches, with the Korean churches, got together in the 80s, late 80s in Miami. And they're still working together to see what are the basis of faith. The faith was their centralized connection. But through that, they created scholarship opportunities to working together. And then we realized there's more common things than uncommon things. But Koreans are very reserved. But my dad was like me. I take it from my dad. He's outgoing. He didn't speak a lot of English. But he goes, no problem, no problem. God bless you. And he just does that stuff because he does thank you, big guy, da 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 da. But I think that's what it took. And I think it's to get out of your comfort zone, because this is who we are. And this is our community, not just the Asian community, this is our community. We have to own it. We have to own it. When things happen to grandparents, when someone pushes down a helpless grandparent for fun, doesn't matter what color you are, what background you are, that's a no-no. You should be upset. You should be angry about why they're attacking. Attack someone like me, you know, or Philip, who's strong. But no, they want to go take advantage of someone who's weak. Are you kidding me? So that for me, I got angry. But then we realized, you know what? We have to do so much together. And Mitzi said it. Don't listen to all the social media and whatever is on the news. When I was teaching my kids at the middle school, I said, you have to do diligence. Don't go for one Google. You got to do 3 or 4 to make sure it makes sense. And that's the story that's going to come out, because you can't trust as one source. And I think we jumped to conclusion by looking to one source instead of multiple sources and finding out what is the truth versus what is the myth. And I'm so happy to be with Emily and Dean Lee and Mitzi here, because somehow we're connecting. And you know, Philip, like, I'll connect with you. And I think that's what it is. You came out of your comfort zone to reach out to me. And I say, you know what, this is what we need. You know?
Yeah, Joshua, I'm happy that you added that, and I'm happy that you introduced the notion of anger. And I think that anger is, well, it's not my place to validate your anger, but I think that anger is a integral part of social justice movements, that the anger can push things forward and really productive ways. And indeed, the violence, I'm looking at my notes from the various threads that we have open in the conversation now. A model minority, perpetual foreigner, insider, outsider, naming. I want to point out, and not to mention the gross lack of education, as Mitzi and Emily and others have pointed to, about AAPIs and also Asia, the notion of Asia and the way it's constructed. All of these taken together, I think, potentiate the possibility of violence against AAPIs. So people say, why is there so much violence taking place now? Well, yes, coronavirus and that's a proximate cause, but in the context of already always other, already always outsider, it makes it easy then that the kindling of the coronavirus, proximate cause blow up into all of this violence. And I think that is absolutely cause for anger. We have about 25 minutes left in the program, and I want to invite our viewers to leave us their questions and comments. Some of you have already done so. Just go to the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen and type in your questions, and we'll make sure that we address those before we close in the time that we have left. I want to, speaking of perpetual foreigner, speaking of otherizing, I want to go to the question of language diversity and multilingualism. Dean Lee, President-elect Lee, when we planned the teach-in, I had this amazing phone call with her. Well, first of all, let me say of the teach-in, this is the one time that I've seen the College of Business, the law school, SIPA, CARTA, CASE, who else do we have? Medicine, Stimple. I called the deans of all of these units, and everybody said, yes, I want to participate. Dean Lee was the very first one to write back, by the way, and said, yes, how can I help? We want to be a part of this. FIU Business wants to push this conversation forward. Tell me how I can help. So at first I was thinking sponsorship, and then I realized, actually, I want her on the panel. I want her to talk. And then Dean Lee, you'll remember that I pitched the idea of, how would you feel, would you be open to delivering part of your statement in Cantonese? And she immediately said yes. The reason I felt strongly about putting Mandarin at the start and Cantonese at the end is because it seems to me that a lot of the otherizing that goes on for AAPIs is around issues of language and language diversity. And I wanted to get comfortable and normalize the idea that we can be in a space and hear languages of Central Asia, South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands, and just be okay with that. And that not be an already always sign of externalness or otherness or whatever. And Dean Lee, I have to say that when you began delivering your address in Cantonese, the reaction from the viewers was so, that's when everybody said, oh, here's when I teared up on them. That's when I teared up, because we had these students, these FIU students writing saying, I understand her. I understand what she's saying. And then for everybody else, it was like being okay with the idea of just not understanding it in that moment, that that's okay, that it's okay, that part of inclusion means sometimes not understanding and being comfortable in the position of being the person who doesn't get every single word in every single moment. So it was really powerful. And I just want to circle back to that and ask you about your experience doing that and why you were in agreement with that idea.
Philip, thank you very much for acknowledging our last conversation. And I said it to our friends here already. Last time when I was given the opportunity to speak some Cantonese, I felt really liberated. And often I think when we speak a different language than most of the people here, when they speak, English, they feel a little bit uncomfortable. Are you talking about me? What are you talking about? Or they will say, oh, you speak Cantonese? Oh, the same as Mandarin. I said, no, they're two languages now. Well, they're two dialects. No, they're now officially two languages because they're very different. But allow me to even say that out loud. It's great. That's part of the effort we have to make, right? As a population together, right? Mitzi was talking about there are flip side of racism. There are a lot of racist Asians too. Let me put it this way, right? So I think like what Joshua also said, it's really up to us to reach out. And there's a poem in Chinese, it's actually fairly famous. It said, spring only belongs to those people who go out of its way to seek for it. And if this is the spring we're looking for, we got to go and seek for it. So I'm going to speak some Cantonese now, and just for some of my fellow friends over here， 多謝大家今日嚟聽我哋講嘢，因為呢個咁樣嘅討論係一個好重要嘅關鍵。如果我哋想繼續行呢一條路，我哋每個人都要落力去支持。So I'm just telling my fellow friends that if this is the path we're going to take on, don't just sit there. We got to be the spring seeker. We got to go out and look for it and make people feel comfortable. Like when people speak Spanish around me, I speak so little. I feel comfortable. I don't make the assumption they talk poorly about me. I was just like, what are you guys talking about? Be a little curious. It's fine. It's okay. So, Philip, I want to tell you how grateful I really am to you, to this panel, to our last conversation, to indulge me, because I know people attending this particular discussion are the spring seeker. They will feel comfortable when I say different language. They will feel comfortable when I talk about, oh, I love Korean food. I mean, this is okay. Just chill out. It's fine.
Yeah, just chill out. I mean, I love that. And it shouldn't be, I mean, thank you for the thanks, but it shouldn't be an indulgence. I mean, there are 6,000 languages in the world, 6,000. And the idea that we are only allowed to go around in one when we have a political space as diverse as the United States. I think there are 1 million speakers of Cantonese in the United States, something like that. I mean, I just think it's brilliant that you feel comfortable doing that. And I want to normalize that at this institution for our FIU family who are watching, that it's okay to move around in our different languages. I mean, yes, we have common languages, English, Spanish, Creole, those are our community languages, but that we can be okay not understanding and hearing, and that does not mean that we have to immediately jump to conclusions along the lines of what I think Joshua was saying, that, oh, they're talking about me, or they're spreading gossip, or they're plotting, or doing what, these types of notions are really problematic and link to the perpetual foreigner myth that we've been talking about throughout this program. I just want to open it up to others to talk about language issues, orienting to English only, orienting, I know, to the burden of maintaining heritage languages that maybe you don't feel comfortable maintaining. Or the burden of being expected to speak your parents' or grandparents' language, or being assumed that you do know it when in fact you don't. Emily?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that. So I grew up in New York City, right? And listen, I look super Chinese. And it's a thing, it's true. It's because I'm 75% Chinese, but my grandparents were born in China, and then they moved to Thailand, but my parents were born in Thailand. I was born in Thailand. So what does that mean? It means I speak Thai. So I don't speak Chinese. And so growing up in New York, it was hard because, I remember at one point just trying to avoid Chinatown just because of all the abuse I would get for not knowing Chinese. And it's so funny. Then I go back to Thailand and everyone thought I was Japanese. And I was like, could I just be me? Like, can I just be a human? And I think that there's that added pressure. Then I had a kid, right? And my kid is, half white, half Asian, and she doesn't know Thai. And so then you have like this perpetual guilt of like, I'm a bad mother, I didn't teach her Thai. And then you're like, okay, I'm just gonna calm down. Right. So first of all, this notion that you got to keep up with anything, they're just all false narratives. Like everyone just got to calm down, like Dean Lee says, chill out. It's fine, right? You're not going to go to jail because you didn't teach your kid Thai, and she's probably not going to be that like unwell adjusted because she doesn't learn Thai, or she may learn it later. Who knows? Who cares? But I think that there's that first notion. I think the second notion of being okay with sometimes just not understanding what is being said. I actually think Miami is pretty good about that. I don't think, I think to Dean Lee said, you can jump in and say, hey, what are you guys talking about? I want to be included. It's just more like, hey, don't leave me out. And I think it's warm and it's accepting and it's vulnerable and it's open, it's authentic. But this notion that, look, my parents, my dad speaks English much better than my mother does, but hey man, they spent their whole life not understanding what the hell is being said in America. And so they were fine with it. Like, they're not sitting there going like, can you just say that in Thai for me so I can understand what you're saying? They're just like, oh, okay. And I don't understand a darn thing you said, but we're just gonna smile and nod and make you feel comfortable. So just smile and nod, make people feel comfortable. And if you really want to get into the conversation, just be like, what you guys talking about? You know, tell me too. I want to know, I want to be in the know. Be vulnerable and just smile and nod.
It's like the penguins, right? Yes. I want to jump in. My wife and I, we're blessed with 3 children. One just finished his first year in college. One's in 6th grade. One's a 3-year-old. My college kid, because of K-pop and K-drama, he speaks, English. He speaks Korean. I understand. My 6th grader, not really. Like 90%, 95% English, 5% Korean. My daughter, on the other hand, 95%, 96% Korean, 4% English. So, but I could see how my middle son, Jeremiah, is talking to Juliana, how she's talking to him in Korean, and she'll understand that his basic words, yes, oh, yes, yes. You want to go eat something? Yes, 배고파, which means are you hungry? And I could see him, because he loves his sister. I mean, he adores her, but I could see him trying to learn her language, trying to learn from a 3-year kid to so he can communicate with her. I think that's the beauty of our culture, our heritage. Am I pushing on it? No. Before, yes. I realized why. I think it will come to time if a child says, I want to learn more about it. Go learn more about it. FIU has a great language course. They have a Korean course there. So I go there, I meet future volunteers, future interns from our program, and I get from them. I think that's what it is. But I want to say that we're missing one topic here is stereotypes. I think that we want to address that, and I think here is a perfect time to share some of the stereotypes are no-no nowadays. Coming from Hollywood, from TV, it's like back in the 70s. We're 2021 and we're still doing it. So I don't know how Philip, as a moderator, I know that Mitzi and Dean Lee has so much to add more than me and also Emily. So I think that should be something we should talk about as well.
Yes, stereotypes. We can spend the last few minutes talking about that, and the bridge to stereotypes from language. I just want to gloss this study that I teach when I teach sociolinguistics. That's about language and perception and stereotypes, and it has to do with the stereotype that AAPI college instructors in the sciences do not communicate clearly and effectively in English. And we've seen all kinds of even backlash to this legislation to get instructors to prove English proficiency and so forth and so on. Deeply problematic. The study is as follows. It's a matched guys type of study. So there's a manipulation of participants involved in which you take a speech stream, a recording, and you play it to your participants, who in this case are college students, and you show them a face, an ostensible instructor. In one condition, the face is an Anglo-white woman. The participants are listening to the recording of a lecture. The next condition, the participants are listening to the exact same recording, but now the face is of an Asian American woman. And the participants are asked in both cases, in both conditions, well, there are a variety of conditions, how much did you learn in this lecture? How well did you understand the instructor? How effective was the teaching? It's the same recording. It's the same English, different faces. And you know what they found is that the college students, upon hearing the Anglo face, hearing that the voice paired with the Anglo face, said, oh yeah, this was amazing. I got it. I love it. Clear. I would love to have this person as my college instructor. But seeing the same voice with an Asian woman's face, they say, oh, I didn't understand it. I couldn't comprehend it. It didn't make any sense. So the researchers concluded, these are linguists and psychologists, that actually what happens is people already always assume lack of understanding among AAPIs based on the stereotype that AAPIs don't speak English or speak English with a heavy accent. So that's a real problem, and that's something that our institutional culture, I think, has to address also, because we have AAPI colleagues, faculty, people who are US born and not, who are in the classroom, who are facing, oh, P.S., what does that also mean for AAPI faculty who then get bad teaching evaluations, who aren't eligible for teaching awards and the whole thing? You know, so that's the notion of systematic racism around a language issue that I think that we have to be more conscious of. But I'll just pause and open this up to stereotypes about language or anything else that you want to get off your chest and address in our remaining minutes.
I do want to just jump in real quick on the Asian face,
Yep.
Anglo face. So there's a startup I was working with, and it was an avatar that he developed to help give cues to people with disabilities in terms of an autism in particular, to tell them what to do. Like there's a little avatar, and he did a little focus group to see how his avatar landed. And his avatar at the time was an Asian woman. And he came back, he says, you know, unfortunately, 80% of the respondents don't trust Asian women giving them sort of medical advice. So he had to put a white man, right? And they like super trust that guy, said the same thing. And the point of the matter is that perpetuation of that stereotype, right? Because they ended up adopting a white man because that was the only way he saw the path to market. That if you use the Asian woman, no one's going to download it. And so it actually reverberates just beyond just teaching, and that perpetuation of the stereotype just based on focus groups. That's the stuff we have to be super mindful about if we're going to sort of smash the systems.
So
No,
I,
yeah, go ahead, Dean Lee.
sorry. So I actually believe psychologically we're human beings. There's a book from Malcolm Gladwell, and it's about talking to a stranger. I think that's the book's name. And he mentioned one thing. It's interesting that we all do stereotyping. We all do. And it's psychologically is like a little fast brain reaction so that we can come to some kind of conclusion. So I would say that stereotyping, whether we like it or not, it happens. But we have to be very mindful, not jump to conclusion based on your stereotyping. And that's what I'm asking for, right? And I'll give a reverse example, right? When I was in my PhD, I was actually being loaned out to teach quantitative method. Well, here you go, Asian, you got to be good at math. You got to be really good. She got to be really a good professor. So to some extent, it's actually worked for my favor, right? So yes, I am good at math, but at the same time, I want to go back and say the same thing. And I think, Philip, you mentioned that study. There's some truth to it. I mean, let's forget about how I look, right? Just my sex. Oh, you're a woman. All right, walking into the classroom as a female professor, Mitzi will probably understand. I mean, in finance, this is a white male dominant discipline, no doubt. I've been a finance professor for many years. Here I walk in, 5'1", Asian woman. Let's forget about Asian woman. Oh, she cannot be as good as the other male professor. But at the end of it, I mean, you got to win them over, right? And I think that's where the education is really fun, right? It's on both sides. Like Mitzi said, we have to work hard. It's not a static problem. It's a dynamic problem. We're going to go in, we're going to win them over. And I would say stereotyping sometimes is inevitable, but I think we need to be very mindful how to use the stereotype to the extent that really enhance our own individual value. So that's how I feel about the stereotyping.
Gosh, we've got 5 minutes left, and all of a sudden, all these major topics are coming into the conversation, which reminds me, we're doing a second version of this, which we'll announce will be in the fall. But Dean Lee, I want to thank you for reminding me. Whoops, I forgot to address intersectionality, major topic. The idea that we already addressed the diversity that lives within the notion of AAPI, but how about all the ways in which AAPI is cross-cut with these other vectors of identification, including gender, sexuality, regionality, language, and so forth. Really important. Hopefully we'll take that up next time. I want to read a couple of quick comments. Maia, I see she's just jumped back on, so I think that means we're running out of time. But I want to say, Gina Lamb says, I suggest turning the microaggression into a micro affirmation from where are you from to how do you identify. I think that's useful. And we have a question from my dear friend Alex. Thank you, panelists. I love hearing your voices and learning about your feelings and your experiences and even research on this important topic, which in the end is about acceptance and the ability to live and thrive as one is. I think that's exactly right. That's the through line throughout this panel. All of you have been saying, take me as I present myself. Here are my projections. Please see that, hear that, and value that. I wonder if after a while you are exhausted, or do you find energy in this type of discussion? How do you reconcile all of this emotional work with the work that you do every day as professionals?
I first want to say I am completely energized by it, completely, because you allow us to have a voice. And I think I see it as an important part. The day I signed up to be a professor, this is in my blood. Right? I love to have this kind of conversation. Let's educate each other. I'm not going to be arrogant and say, I'm going to tell you everything, teach everything. I'll be the first one in the room to tell you I don't know a lot of things, but let's have a conversation. So having this opportunity to discuss what's been, in my mind, it's tremendous. I'm completely energized.
For me, I'm energized by it as a professor. You kind of are drawn to. I chose to teach race and ethnicity. So, but it's also exhausting on a daily basis to being Black and Asian. So I'm like dealing with a lot of stuff all the time, but also with it, intimately with my own family, like constantly trying to educate them. My mom will sometimes she'll say racist stuff. I'm like, Mom, what are you saying? Did you really just say that? So it's a constant, struggle. So you have to build in, I think for anybody who's doing this kind of work, you have to build in the time to be mindful, to kind of regroup and stay centered. But it can be both energizing and exhausting.
Emily?
I'd say meeting everyone here is energizing. Getting a chance to talk is energizing, but every day it's exhausting. Every moment is exhausting. And it's not even that even if you're not educating someone about it, just moving about the intersectionality of being female and Asian is really rough. And I think that moving around in that space is exhausting. How does it sort of permeate into professional life? Well, hell, we build an inclusive program, right? We really, like the folks on my staff are really, really, really deep thinkers on this notion of inclusion. Does that mean that they don't present sometimes maybe not the right way? No, they do. They make mistakes. So the point is, though, we're trying to be open to talk to each other around it. We're very diverse, and so that's how it presents itself. But yes, super tired, super exhausted, and then there's a global pandemic, so like super tired.
As a program director for the Miami-Dade County's Asian Americans Advisory Board, as an advocate for the Asian voices to come together and be the liaison to bring them to the focus, I'm very energized. But as Mitch said, I am tired. I am exhausted with 3 kids and working from home is going to office is easier than staying home. But I'm very thankful that they kind of made me realize why I do this. If we don't, all this conversation, I'm gonna be honest, I've been to so many panels, I listened to so many panels, but unless there is an action point afterwards, then guess what? We're gonna have this conversation again next time. Same topic, same thing, but with maybe different panelists, with different voices, different faces, but we're gonna do the same thing. And I think I want to congratulate Philip to following up that we're not a virus to this. And now you say in the fall. The more we talk about it, I think people are realizing the things that we can do to make the change. And I'm gonna be honest, I tell my board members, I said, if our work doesn't translate into change for our kids, we're all useless. you spend all this time, maybe for the namesake. I hope that's not the case. Or saying, I sit on a board. I hope that's not the case. But unless you change the future generation, who will be our leaders? So that they don't face what we're facing today, then it's a lost cause, right? And I hope and pray that all these people saying, great panel, but let's make the change. Get out of the comfort zone. Come and see me. I'm in downtown Miami. Or call me up. 375-1570, 305-375-1570, hjoshua@mommyday.gov. Call me up. We have a conversation. I'm a coffee junkie. You have a cup of coffee? Call me up. We have a cup of coffee. Mitzi, yeah, now we got to connect.
Yes.
Well, when I saw you last time, I said, I got to connect. I'll put your name down. I said, I need to connect with Mitzi. Dr. Joanne Lee, we have honored her 3 years ago as on our community dinner. But Emily, I gotta get to know you better because, and we're gonna get some good Thai food with your mom and get some great Korean food. But I think, are we comfortable at this time? Yes. But for me, it's worth every minute to make someone uncomfortable. That is my job. To make them say, you know, why am I feeling this uncomfortable? Why am I feeling this? Because you know what? I had this notion that I didn't know that I'm part of the problem. And now I can make a change because we can make a change, but within ourselves, one at a time. But if I'm able to change, then guess what? Anyone can change. I'm very stubborn. But if I'm able to change a bit by having conversation, I think that itself is the change that we're making. So I want to say thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Joshua. And thank you for being here, and thank all of the panelists. I want to just very quickly, we've gone over, so we've got to stop. I'm going to kick it back to you, Maya. But I want to say on action points, Joshua's called for action points. Yes, 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 and yes, and yes. The conversations, we think of them as action, as an educational agenda, but we also have to say, and I want to congratulate FIU for creating the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. E.K. Hudson and Emmanuel Bowles, and all of us who are on the DEI Council for doing this work, that we are thinking about this institutionally in a very serious way. And thanks to the provost also for approving that and putting this forward at our institution. So lots of action points, I think, forthcoming. We're thinking about policy issues and educational issues, the full range of issues that we have to think through as an institution to be more diverse, more inclusive, and more equitable, including transformational issues going all the way back to one of Mitzi's very first points in this program. Before I pass it to Maya, I just want to say thank you, Emily, thank you, Dean Lee, thank you, Mitzi, thank you, Joshua. This was amazing, and I really enjoyed your experiences, expertise, and conversation. Maya?
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists, thank you to Philip, and thank you to our partners in collaboration. We do look forward to our next conversation where we will be talking about translating this into change and also the role of philanthropy in this work. Thank you all so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you.
Thank you.
Had a wonderful time. Mitzi, I'm gonna give you a